Okay, we're a go. Welcome everybody to the May 16th Chicagoland SharePoint Users Group. I'm your host, Mark Vogt with Emtec Consulting based here in Chicago. We've got a number of guest presenters today, and we have a jam-packed agenda, my favorite kind of agenda when there's almost too much to get into the hour. Without further ado, we've got Tom Novello from Axiomatics, we've got Kiran Kakanur, we've got Michael Blumenthal, we've got Dennis HasenFang from Pathfinder as well. Didn't get it on that front slide. Let's dive in and look at what our agenda is for today. We always have our little big picture item, a little bit about basics on SharePoint. We're going to dive into attribute access control, followed by our normal SharePoint news and events, Office 365 updates, news and events, SharePoint framework updates from Ralph Rivas. Mike and Ralph can't be here today, but I'll be going through their slides that they gave me. Then we're going to dive into a couple of attendee member presentations, one by Dennis HasenFang from Pathfinder on the PowerApps on-premises data gateway. This is an amazing technology you guys are going to want to know about because it puts everything behind your firewall suddenly in the realm of a mobile application. Exciting stuff. Followed right by that is going to be Kiran Kakanur from RightPoint talking about how to use Docker containers, which is the new virtual machine-like wave that's going through the entire internet, the entire the planet, on how to create application containers inside the SharePoint framework itself. I'll follow up in the rear with PowerApps forms inside SharePoint lists. I want people here looking ahead, and we learned from the Microsoft Build conference just a week ago that yes, PowerApps is going to be the replacement for InfoPath, which begs the immediate question, what should it look like if you're going to be doing SharePoint lists? How does that actually look right now? I'll give you some idea. Remember that we're trying to move away from Meetup. This is just a little reminder slide that we've been on Meetup for years now, but they're trying to push us away as a virtual meeting. We're going to be going to LinkedIn. Keep watching for emails on updates on that. Big picture stuff. We always want to understand where SharePoint is, specifically where all these power tools are that have been popping up. If we look in the realm of all of the people in an organization, we've got the developers at the top, we've got the users at the bottom, we've got the power users in between. And it's always been this wildly outnumbered little triangle at the top where the developers are, that there's currently a 100-to-1 ratio between any users and the IT, the developers trying to build them solutions. They're always outnumbered. It can't work that way. But if you step into the realm of if you start empowering the power users, what that represents is untapped development capabilities. And this is why we're so excited about Power BI, about Power Apps, about the Azure tools, because this, in an organization, it's empowering these guys that is going to augment the capabilities of these developers. And when you have consulting firms in the middle trying to help out, you end up with a ratio not of 100-to-1, of something more like 4-to-1, that there's 4 users for every 1 developer or developer-like person. And that's where we want to be. That's why we're doing this kind of stuff. Next, we're going to have Tom Novello from Axiomatics talking about attribute-based access control. Tom, I'm going to change presenter over to you. Here it comes. And the screen is all yours. I'll let you know, and it's already up. I see it. You're good to go. We see present mode.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, folks. This is Tom Novello with Axiomatics, coming to you live from the 23rd floor at 25 West Monroe. We're going to talk a little bit about easily securing your documents inside SharePoint today. You know, when you talk about security, it's got to be fast, efficient, and it's got to be able to take the guesswork out of security, and it's got to be accurate. So some of the key capabilities, we're going to talk about reducing and simplifying the access control and management through centralization and visibility. We're using the same policies, leveraging the power of ABAC in SharePoint with dynamic runtime access control. And also we'll touch briefly on RBAC and ABAC hybrid approach and extending SharePoint's built-in access control models. Really what we're trying to help you do is comply with not only import-export controls, nationality, know who you're sharing data and documents with, and across the global landscape, because as you share information across country to country, you will find yourself in a transfer of IP or even technology, which puts you in a compliance issue within the U.S. government. But also now with GDPR coming up, other regulations are going to kick in. We're going to talk to you a little bit about whitelisting and blacklisting and some how you can break the glass in that environment. So we're going to talk to you on architecture about securing SharePoint with a dedicated interceptor, optimizing the environment in SharePoint 2016, and more importantly, also show you some of the automated data classification capabilities of the platform. So a little bit about the RBAC and ABAC approach. Truly what we're doing is we're giving you that fine-grained access control. We're going to take not only the groups that you have and consume them, but now apply real-time attributes like who, where, how, when, and even what location an individual can access a document or data. So why does it apply? Again, you can enforce policies across your organization. You can filter document lists. You can filter search results as well so that you can know who doesn't have access and who does have access across your enterprise. So the architecture overview, very simple. You open a document, we then at the enforcement point intercept the request. We run that through the policy engine that you will see right here. It's a decision engine based on the policies that are applied, and we provide an access or deny feedback loop automatically at runtime. So the concept we're going to talk about today is really about focused on 2 SharePoint sites containing medical data, and as well as the policy enforcement point. And in this case, we see that we've got a customer name, we've got the study name, the document name, the author, the drug, the classification, red, green, or yellow. And then what you're going to also see here in the process, got a hiccup.
You're fine.
So there's the overview of the metadata. What's going to end up happening there is we're also going to pull in the location from a native LDAP environment, and then we're going to pull in data from the drug databases. We're going to apply policies, and what you see here is the workflow. The request comes in to the Access SharePoint document, and we start to apply the policies to that and provide, whether or not you have the right classification. If you have access to the red data, you will get a permit. If you don't, you will get denied. Same goes for controlling the drug data. If you're not supposed to have access there, you will either get denied or you will get access depending on your use case. So some of the things that are based on the workflow that I just showed up there, Bob is going to attempt to take a look at the study overview. And the expected response would be that he has the proper clearance. We're going to go ahead and permit the request. And the next request is Frank is going to try to view the same data. However, he's in the wrong location. So based on the rules and the attributes of Frank, primarily location, we're going to deny that. We have customers that also apply this where they apply nationality due to the complexity of import-export controls in pharma, manufacturing, as well as finance, as well as a legal organization we're working with today. Then you also have the next request where Chuck views a process document, and because he's in Chicago, unfortunately, he's on the blacklist, so he is denied. So again, simplified architecture. We have an enforcement point. The request comes in, the enforcement point picks that up, sends the process through the decision engine that automatically sends back a permit deny at that point, and you either gain access or denied access to the SharePoint data and documents that are being shared globally across the organization. We can also expand the scope a little bit and talk about building whitelists and being able to build those on a global basis so that you can simplify the access controls as well as help not only SharePoint developers avoid that nesting of access rights that we talked about last month, but also more importantly, get that granularity you're looking for. So if you're interested in hearing more or perhaps even digging deeper into some of the complexities that we're addressing, my contact information is up on the screen along with my associate, Stacy Hunt. We're both here at 525 West Monroe. We do travel throughout the Midwest, but would love to stay local if you folks would have us in your offices to meet with you.
Tom, you still got a couple of minutes left. I want you to back up to the slide that shows the engine.
Sure.
Right there. Very intriguing stuff, very useful that you get to take these human readable policies. That's the big value that I see here. When you talk about an enforcement point, how does this manifest under the hood? We've got SharePoint web servers, SharePoint app servers, SharePoint database servers up in the cloud. Yeah, we don't have the granularity, the idea that we're seeing web servers and stuff. There's just SharePoint. But for this works in on-premises as well, right?
Yes, yes.
Does it? Is this a cloud service that you're interacting with all the time, or is this actually a server behind the firewall that you're installing this particular technology on?
Yes, so there's a couple of ways to deploy the technology. One is on-prem, obviously on a physical server or a virtual machine. Up in the cloud, you can deploy a VM, literally, and sit it between the access point. And when the requests come in, instead of going directly to SharePoint, they come to us. We apply the access or deny request, and then we either let you through or we send you on your way.
Very interesting. When you talk about permit versus deny, the permit side, everybody thinks is, yeah, you're going to get to see the document. What does deny actually look like? Is there a message that says you're missing a particular policy, or is it just a deny message and the user has to figure out the why part?
Well, you know, a couple of things that are important here. You will get simply a deny message. You know, your credentials will have failed, if you will.
Sure.
The optimization of those credentials will have failed. The reason that we don't give detail there is, quite frankly, if you do, customers can find a way around your.
Yeah, you're giving them clues on how to circumvent it.
So, you know, the whole idea here is that IT, SharePoint, and security can all collaborate and make sure that there's no backdoors, as well as there's an auditability of where users are trying to log into and from, who was denied, so we can pull automated reports and present that to say who was denied and why, in case you ever have to present that.
Sure.
But again, it's all about making sure that we don't present any way for somebody to go around it. You know, we don't provide grayed out returns, if you will, so that, because anything that's grayed out, customer, you know, end users do try to snoop around and figure it out. And as we talked about before, one of the biggest challenges facing SharePoint users today is accidental breaches. Right. Nobody, typically 90% of the time, nobody intends to share data inappropriately, but our job is to help you ensure that that data is secured. So no backdoor access there.
Great. Last question. In all of the scenarios you talked about so far, it's interacting with a list and the information there, interacting with what appears to be a library, documents, information there. Does this also enforce the information coming in and out of, let's say, search results, where you're seeing a list of documents? You didn't get to click on them, but does it even apply to the documents that it can hide, let's say, documents from search results that you're not even aware they exist? Or is that something that Axiomatics is still working on?
Yes, absolutely. That is something that we can actually help you with today. I've got a large manufacturer in Milwaukee that is currently working in a SharePoint environment there, where there's secret groups, secret SharePoint users that are out there that they don't even know about internally. So one of the first things they're doing is trying to audit those groups, and then making sure that they secure them so that you have access to search for it or not search for it. That's one of the scenarios we're talking about today.
Fantastic. I think we've got one question from the audience before we let you go. They were asking, is API access covered?
Yes.
I'm not sure what they... Well, there's the short answer there. And we'll put you in touch with the people that are curious, okay, Tom?
Would be wonderful. We'd love to have them.
Tom, a few last seconds with your contact information on that screen, and then I'll ask you to hand the presenter back to me.
You got it.
There's information for everybody that might be... that might find a need for this. Again, GDPR triggers on May 25th, guys. And then if you're interacting with anything in the EU that has to do with personal data, even our company does, you need to be GDPR compliant. And this is a step in that direction. Tom, thanks for spending the time here. We're looking forward to possibly having you back and giving you a little bit more time in the near future to give a full-on demo of the product. I'm going to let you hand over back to me, and I'm going to, oh, actually, I get to do it. I'm going to grab it. I'm sending it back to myself. Dina, let me know if you can see the screen. So I've got some feedback.
All good.
Good. All right, we're going to dive into the next topic, SharePoint news and events. Not a lot of news going on, except that Microsoft's Build Conference 2018 in Seattle last week was phenomenal. Also, they streamed everything from the keynote speech on. That if you were any kind of a developer for Microsoft, and there was a lot of stuff related to Azure, a lot of stuff related to SharePoint, a lot of stuff related to the SPFx, the SharePoint framework, your eyes were rolling in the back of your head. I recorded everything. I probably took 400 screenshots in 3 days just to try to retain everything. We got a bunch of events coming up all over the country. May 5th, was Chicago Saturday for the Chicago suburbs. Was SharePoint Saturday for the Chicago suburbs, and it was also fantastic. We had a lot of fun there. Coming up, SharePoint North America in Las Vegas. That's this next beginning of next week. You're going to start seeing App in a Day for PowerApps in San Francisco, in Detroit. Hopefully, we're going to get one to come to Chicago. Watch for more news on that, but it's coming up in late May. Late June, we got the Digital Workspace Experience here in Chicago. Check it out. Late July, we got SharePoint Saturday in New York City. So if you're doing some vacationing, you might want to go and stop by there. August 20th, so we're talking late August, beginning of the school year, is the SharePoint Fest in Seattle, Washington. That's the first one of the season. We've also got SP TechCon in Boston, Massachusetts. Starting in the fall, we got SharePoint Saturday, Chicago Metro. Details are still TBD, so watch out for it. If it's as good as the spring one, it's going to be an exciting thing to attend. Last but not last or least is Ignite 2018 in Orlando. If you're one of those lucky few who gets time off to go and do something like that, I highly recommend checking out that in late September. And then looking way ahead, we got SharePoint Fest in December, based here in Chicago. That continues to increase, take up more and more time, more and more space, and be cooler every single year. Watch out for it. Office 365 news and events. I'm going to kill this slide presentation and open up Michael's deck. Give me one moment. And come on. Here we go. I'm just going to basically skim over them a little bit. Dina, can you tell me if you're seeing it or not?
All good.
All good. This is from Michael Blumenthal, the MVP that's in charge of Office 365. A lot of IT events overlap with what I just talked about on the calendar. SPNA in Las Vegas, keynote speaking on May 21st. There's a Chicago Code Camp, June 9th. Check it out. DWX we just talked about in Chicago. There's that conference being held in Wisconsin Dells. I missed that one. I think people need to check this one out because it's just a 3-hour drive and you're in Wisconsin Dells. The kids can have fun. You can go and watch it and attend this particular conference. Ignite in September, Saturday, SharePoint Saturday, Chicago in the fall, and SP Fest in Chicago here in December. Let's see, May 21st, keynote speaking. Mike is actually going to be doing, I think, some summit watching. Watch this bit.ly link to find out more. I think he's going to be hosting a summit where you get to watch it. Massive storage increases are on the horizon for SharePoint. Before, the storage was 1 terabyte plus the number of licenses that you had, but now we're going to end up with the number of e-licenses times 10 gigabytes, an order of magnitude increase in your storage capacity that Microsoft is giving away. Why? Because they're getting better at it. They want more of it. It's useful to everybody. Next, on the SharePoint front, updated site usage pages and customizable request access pages are now becoming available. It's just making SharePoint easier to work with, easier to build solutions up against. In the Yammer front, we can now enforce Office 365 AADs for your identities. Otherwise, under 16-year-olds will lose access. So they're trying to make it available to everybody. In the world of PowerApps, this is cool. I got a chance to work with this a couple of weeks ago. SharePoint, the new version, the new experience, there's now a web part in SharePoint for adding a PowerApp onto the page. I think I demoed that either at I know I did it at SharePoint Saturday. It was one of the first things everybody just happened to see because of my demo environment. But the point is, you go into a brand new page. In the new experience, you can click on, I want to add something to the page. And instead of adding a list, adding a library, there's actually a box there that says add a PowerApp, and all you have to do is give it the PowerApp's ID. It's a GUID, and it goes and gets the rest and then lays that PowerApp right in your SharePoint page. This is powerful. This is a cool way for people to consume PowerApps while still feeling like they're still inside SharePoint. On the Teams front, there's now an SP list as tabs that are actually improved. I'm supposed to read this out loud. Outlook file options, ease of access, show, read, aloud, word. I think it's actually doing text to speech is now available on here. Last, in the world of the Microsoft Planner that you saw me gushing about, it now supports guest access. Why does Mark think that's cool? Because the Planner was telling everybody how to collaborate together. And if your guests are shut out, they're the people that typically on the customer side that you need to be able to interact with. So shutting them out doesn't make any sense. Now they let them back in and everybody gets to collaborate on that third stage of a model for collaboration maturity, not just communicating, not just sharing, but actually tasking and tracking those tasks. That's exciting to look at. Enough on Michael's slides. That's everything. I'm going to jump back into our deck and pick up where we left off. In fact, the very next one is now Ralph Rivas and Magenic Consulting. And those slides I've actually embedded into mine. Ralph, too, was monitoring and watching the SharePoint Build Conference, and they talked a lot about SPFx. Some big takeaways are all highlighted here. Teams and SharePoint are now working together. There's a new blog there that you want to come and check out. They're actually calling it Collaboration Nirvana. There's a link that's available in the slide deck that'll be made available to you after the session. Ralph walked away talking about the Edge browser not being quite such a second banana anymore over Chrome. There's actually remote debugging of the SharePoint framework available, and that is a cool thing. Check that out at the highlighted link. Excuse me. SPF's version 1.5 is coming very soon. There's a lot of changes on the forefront, again, in the SharePoint framework. Global deployment of the SharePoint framework extensions, something that's been called out. Microsoft is finally getting around to realizing people don't want to build extensions and deploy them to a single site collection. They want to deploy them globally. Now that's becoming possible. Stay tuned and watch for more on that. There's more connected web parts also available. SharePoint Pages as a tab in Teams is now available, but we already had that. Graph API, which is this huge conglomerate web service, is not going to become generally available until September 2018. It's gone through some very significant evolution even in the last 6 months. They're trying to build something that is one single universal catch-all, be-all web service. It's going to take just a little bit more work. Continuing with SharePoint news and events, SharePoint framework news and events, they're expanding on the different kinds of package managers that are available. And Ralph was talking about something called joining the fight club. There's a lot of bleeding edge packages out there that he is convinced there are a lot of people that are going to want to try to get involved with. You've seen some of the pages that Ralph has turned you guys on to. Go and join that quote unquote fight club. Find out more about those packages. That's what's going to force the evolution of those packages until they become fit for the rest of us. Next. Extensions. Oh, this is just an expansion that historically the SPFx extensions could only be applied or deployed to a specific site collection, and now they're expanding on that. So this is just a little bit more detail on this slide talking about what I summarized on the very first slide. We've now got connected web parts that they're working towards. It's going to be ready in the level 2. And now they're actually starting to expand out to Teams app development. That's a new thing, not just SharePoint development, but specifically Teams development. Watch for more activity in this particular area. More detail on the Graph API. It's not final yet. It's going to go GA in September, like I just mentioned earlier. A couple of slides that Ralph wanted me to show. SharePoint framework with dynamic data, a rehash of what we just summarized in the bullet points, and an overview of where the Graph API is looking right now, something that you can consume at your leisure in the slides after the session. Wow, managed to get all of that in. Next, we're going to segue over to Kiran Kakanur from RightPoint talking about Docker containers inside SPFx. Kiran, I'm switching over to you. There you go. We're actually making really good time right now. Oh, sorry, Kiran, I need to pull away. I actually missed on an item. The next topic is actually Dennis. Sorry, Dennis, I'm handing it over to you. I missed the slide. What we're really talking about next is the data gateway, PowerApps data gateway. Dennis, I just handed you presenter rights.
Can you see?
Not yet, waiting for it to pop up.
All good. I can see it. Thank you.
Excellent.
Oh, good.
All right. So this talk specifically relates to a work item that I had come across my desk here at the office. And it relates to creating an on-premise gateway for us to connect on-prem data to the cloud. A little bit about me. I've been a consultant in the SharePoint .NET space for 10, 15 years, both in Chicago and currently based out of Milwaukee. I worked in a wide variety of verticals, including healthcare, finance, engineering, manufacturing, as well as government. And so this kind of come across my desk. Basically, we had a service ticket. A user was trying to create a Power App because they had heard about this great new technology, and they wanted to build something. And then they got to the point where they were going to connect this Power App to an internal SQL database, and they said that they needed a gateway, and they clicked the drop down, and there was nothing there. And so essentially, I had done some work in a previous life, at a previous job, related to one of these on-prem gateways related to Power BI. And so where the question started to come up is, how do we leverage this gateway in a more enterprise level way, and set it up and structure it in such a way that we both have fault tolerance, that we have high availability, and what are the differences between the different versions of this product? The particular project that I was tasked with was creating this gateway so that we could connect a PowerApps and Flow to an internal SQL database, which is a net result of an internal healthcare product that's deployed here locally. And there's more than terabytes of data. And just to kind of give a high level, this is kind of a secondary project that I'm working on, but I thought I would kind of bring it up. We talked a little bit last time about some of this. So after doing some research and talking with some of the folks online from Microsoft, I really wanted to get an understanding of what the difference is between the on-premise gateway for Power Apps and the on-premise gateway for Power BI. And basically, the answer that I got back was they're basically the same product. And so I just kind of got this off Microsoft's documentation, and I provided the URL here for you guys to review later on. But essentially, they have this Azure Service Bus that your gateway plugs into, and it provides the availability for you to make data on-prem available to a wide variety of these different products. And more particular, what I'm looking for is BI, PowerApps, and Flow. So when you install this, it's basically literally you just go out to Microsoft's website and download the EXE and run it. So you have a couple different install options. You can do it as a personal mode, which basically means you install it on your local machine and then you run these tools locally. And you can connect to systems internally based upon the fact that you're sitting at your workstation, either creating these reports or creating these Power Apps. In addition to that, you can do this on-premise data gateway, which essentially is a server-based tool, which you would basically set up. In our case, we're looking to set up a VM, and then this runs on that VM 24/7. And then you can see over here on the right-hand side, we have the ability to do clustering. Because I thought originally that it made no sense that we were going to run all of these mission-critical line-of-business apps, and we were all going to have it connecting to a single workstation that's running on a VM that may or may not be turned on all the time. So
yeah, there'd be a bottleneck there, wouldn't there?
Yeah, and so it looks like we can cluster these things. And I guess the instance that I'm looking for initially is just fault tolerance, but depending on the need, service need, it looks like we can just continue to add more machines to this and essentially make this available to all of our internal users. So again, just to recap, so there's two high-level install methods. So there's the personal installation, which kind of ties into like Power BI Desktop as an example. It basically allows you to connect to local resources to the cloud, but it within the context that you're running those reports or those apps on your local machine, and that it's not necessarily something that you're serving out to other people. If you're going to be creating server-based applications that are going to be connecting from the cloud back into your organization for live data, for example, if you have a massive SQL database that you want to pull information from, you're going to want to do this server regular recommended mode and get that installed. And so based on that, I've seen this at 2 companies now where somebody decides that they heard a buzzword about PowerApps and they go out and they download it and they start messing around with it. So this kind of brought up some observations, questions, concerns that I had. So basically, it doesn't appear that there's any real restrictions, at least not initially, on people that can just download this to their workstation. So if you have SQL databases that people have access to, I'm not seeing anything, at least initially, that would deny anyone the ability to do that. Similarly, if you wanted to just download Power BI Desktop and run a report against some Excel documents in place, you pretty much can do that. So I pose, is this some kind of a security concern that we would have, that people would be able to open up internal data to the cloud? I'm not sure exactly how that would be impacted, but just something to consider. And then, I mean, even as somebody that's been doing SharePoint and data integration for years, it was very ambiguous, like what this is and how it works and how we got to get this all put together. Once I found the documentation and started to drill into it, it started to make a little more sense to me. It would be nice if Microsoft made this as a single product solution that it would just be installed. I mean, technically that's what it is, but when they describe it, in each of the different apps, they say you need to get connected to one of these gateways. It's not explicitly called out as a separate product. So there's some ambiguity there on how it's used, when you need it, and what you're going to use it for. And then the other thing is that in every instance thus far, my experience has been the end users are coming to IS or IT, and they're basically saying, hey, I want to connect to this data, and I've gone ahead and installed this software, and I can't make it work. And so this is something, if you're part of the Office 365 team within your organization, this might be something you'd want to kind of get in front of so that you could make this service available to your end users, so that when they do decide to go down that road, or they're willing to make that leap of faith into these new apps, that you can kind of show that you're ready and prepared for it, rather than kind of where I've been at for the last 2 opportunities, kind of trying to figure out how we get these services to be connected. And so kind of with that, I'm in the process right now of speccing out hardware, virtual hardware for us internally to get this stuff set up. We'll be doing the install in the next month or so. I've been asked to kind of come back in one of the future events to kind of walk through some of that installation process and perhaps demo how some of this works. I could probably do that on a personal install version, but I would open up at this point if anybody had any commentary or discussion or questions.
I'm looking here to see if there's any questions on the chat tool. Not seeing them yet, Dennis. But everybody, intriguing technology, because it starts on the inside of the firewall. And as I understand it so far, I've done a couple of these deployments. What's really happening is it's running a scheduled task on a regular basis from inside the firewall, going out through the firewall on 80 and on 443 for ports. So they're already open. There's nothing required by your firewall. It's going up and accessing what I'll call message queues or work queues up in the cloud related to Power BI, related to Power Apps. Power Apps and Power BI talk to those queues, if you will, and leave either responses or requests for them. And this agent goes through the firewall and regularly checks. It does it so fast, it looks as if there's actually a gateway passing through this firewall. In fact, it's Microsoft's clever approach to saying, here, as long as everything's sourcing from inside the firewall and going up into this cloud, into these work queues where you leave a question, they leave an answer, you go get the answer, you bring it back down. You're not doing anything to violate the security of your firewall, but you're providing a super convenient mechanism for being able to let Power BI and Power Apps, in other words, mobile platforms, access data that's on premise behind the firewall. Watch for a demo for that in the June, a real demo of that, both from the use point and from the install point in the June Chicagoland SharePoint users group session. Fantastic presentation, Dennis. Thanks very much. Can you hand me back control? Or actually, I think I can just pull it away momentarily.
You got it?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Can everybody see? Come on,
Blue
let's
screen.
presentate. All right,
And we're good.
All right, that was Dennis HasenFang from Pathfinder on PowerApps on-premise data gateway. Thanks, Dennis. Next, we've got Docker containers inside SharePoint framework. Kiran Kakanur, changing presenting over to you, Kiran. It's all yours.
Alrighty, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Mark. I greatly appreciate the opportunity here. My name is Kiran Kakanur. I am with RightPoint, and we're headquartered in Chicago, 29 North Wacker Drive. And today I'm going to be talking about using Docker in SharePoint framework development. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
Perfect. Thank you.
We're waiting for the screen share now, and there it is. Okay, go ahead.
Excellent. All right. So again, I'm going to be talking about Docker and SharePoint framework development. What is Docker and its value add? So let me go over to that current slide. Is that still okay? I'm actually on two monitors.
Yeah, looks good, Kiran.
It's looking okay for you guys. Cool. All right. Docker itself is a virtualization technology. So if you've worked with SharePoint before, you may have had a gargantuan VM, a virtual machine, maybe 80 gig or even larger VMs that you used to run or lug around because you wanted to have a SharePoint 2013 VM or a SharePoint 2010 VM, or for that matter, 2016. Docker changes all of that in that it's actually a very lightweight virtual machine. It's no longer this 80 gig behemoth that you got to spin up every time you got to work on a client project, and the client uses SharePoint 2013, for example. The value add right there is it can host multiple versions of SharePoint framework. Let's say you had worked on a project about a year ago when the SPFx version was, I think it was 1.1.1. And then, the client wants to make some updates, but they also want to use the newer framework version, 1.4.1. That is a perfect scenario for Docker again. And we'll talk about, and I'll illustrate what that really means once I get to the demo part of it. Again, even though I say multiple versions of SharePoint, Docker is not just for SharePoint. It can be for any other tool set and configuration. So it's essentially isolating your tool sets in an environment and being able to work with it. The way I look at it, it's a great tool for setting up like your default images for your development team. From what I've seen, well, I've only worked with the Windows experience, if you will, but I've heard good things from my buddies who use Mac as well. It's the exact same. I'm sorry, was there a question? Or?
No, you've already answered one question I had, which is running multiple versions of the SharePoint framework. That starts to make perfect sense that this thing has been evolving so quickly that it begs the question, what if you've already got some solution in place that's using the earlier version of the framework, and now you want to build other solutions and leverage the newer versions? You can't install the newer version because suddenly you're going to impact the code that's running based on the older version. But if you can isolate that into a little virtual machine that just stays in its own little SharePoint framework version 1.1.1 space until it lives out, I don't know, its entire life cycle, then you could go and add other containers on that same, let's say, virtual machine server, that same larger physical server, add these different containers and work inside there. And you're saying you could even make entire development environments inside these little containers that are, for lack of a better term, like a micro VM. Am I following you?
Exactly. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Continue, please. Yeah.
And who is using Docker? And you'll see a lot of big players out there, and I'm sure there's others out there, but ADP, Expedia, Visa, and it's all over the board. As you can see, it's not just a type of company. It's completely across the board. A lot of folks out there are leveraging this cool technology. So I just wanted to have a slide to kind of illustrate, how popular Docker is.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I don't know if you guys can hear the background noise here.
No, you're fine, Kiran.
All right. All righty. Now that we know what Docker is and what the value add is, how do you get started with Docker? I have a few URLs, and I'll again go walk through some of these when I'm doing the demo. But just to kind of give the folks on the call some reference information, I have some links out here. Mark, I'm glad you touched on the terminology because it's always confusing. So I did want to point that out. My third bullet point there, basic terminology. So when I talk about an image, it's the actual template. And when I talk about a container, it's an instance of that image. So essentially like the micro virtual machine that you were alluding to. So I wanted to kind of get that terminology straight, if you will. We'll go over to the docker.com and we'll pick the SPFx image that's already out there. Waldeck has a wonderful SPFx Docker image that I've used, and we'll be actually looking at that today. One of the things that I found out the hard way is when you're setting Docker up, you want to make sure that you're sharing your local folder, if you will, to Docker. So Docker is aware where to go build its stuff, where to go run its code from. And again, you don't have to worry about all of this. I'll be kind of walking us through this. I just wanted to quickly pause and see if there were any questions. If not, I think the next thing is just going into the demo.
Yeah, feel free. I think we all want to see the demo. I think a lot of people have an idea of what a virtual machine is. You launch a virtual machine either on your laptop or there's one running in a VM hosting environment, and then you remote into it. So the question on everybody's mind is, well, if you're running this Docker container, what does that look like when do you remote into it, that kind of thing? I think you're about to show us.
Excellent. Can you guys see my screen? I'm actually in a VM that's actually hosted in Azure. So this is my own SharePoint environment that I have, and I've been playing with Docker in this environment. So it's again hosted in Azure. I just had the same set of links. So if you wanted to just get started on Docker, great place is docker.com. And
so you're on a VM right now, and that VM has the Docker engine installed on that virtual machine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It does, and I'll actually walk us through the settings as well. But I want to kind of share some of the links that I had on the slide. So you would go here, you would install, if you're using Windows, you would go install the Docker installer from here. And I believe there's an equivalent for Mac as well. Docker Hub is where you would go. Once you've set up your Docker, you then want to get started on some SPFx development. And you would just go to this page, hub.docker.com, and search for SPFx. And we should see a few hits. The very first one is the one that I've been using. So, and if I click on that, it has more information on what the image is. So, and the usage details and such. Let me go over to tags to kind of illustrate what I was referring to earlier, the different versions of SharePoint FX. So as you can see, there were, I guess from 2 years ago, if you will, there was a drop 4 2 years ago, all the way up until, 3 months ago, which is the on-prem version. And that's the one that I'm going to be demoing here. But in theory, we could also have, we could also be running an online Docker version as well as latest. Or, like I was referring to my earlier example, if your client happened to be using a very specific version, you could actually be working with that version as well. And I think 1.4.1 through, I think, about 1.1.0 from a year ago.
Wow. And these are all
Alrighty.
these are all Docker images. These are Docker images that represent a SharePoint framework of each of those versions that you can go and spin up so you can develop against it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
So I've already done like the Docker installation. It's pretty straightforward. It's free. You actually just need to sign up for it. So you could sign up with your Gmail account, your company account, what have you, and a password, and you're ready to go rock and roll with Docker. So because I installed Docker, you'll notice, I don't know if you can see this, I'm hovering over a little status icon at the very bottom of my screen on the right-hand side. It says Docker is running.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and click on that. So this is the little Docker settings menu, if you will. I'm actually going to go over to, we'll just take a quick peek here. That's what it looks like, after you've installed it. That's like the About Docker screen, but let's specifically dive into settings because there's one area that I wanted to point out. I pretty much went with the default settings here. Start Docker when you log in. Shared drives. This is what I was alluding to when before working with Docker. You want to make sure that you're granting access to Docker to your local drive. I happen to have C and D drives, but my code is actually just running off of the C drive. So I've said, okay, go ahead and share my C drive with the Docker technology. All right. Advanced, I didn't really mess around with a lot of this. All these are default settings.
And this is that's just consuming the resources that are available to that virtual machine that's running Docker, right? So
exactly.
So if you had downloaded Docker to say your laptop itself, you'd be looking at the resources available inside your laptop. It's CPUs, it's cores, it's RAM, it's hard drive space.
Yep. Cool. You got it. Again, nothing here, but I just want to kind of walk us through the different tabs. Diagnose feedback, reset. All right, I'm all done with showing that aspect of it. So let's actually get to doing some stuff with Docker. So I'm going to go over to my C drive. I have some folders that I had set up from earlier experimentation. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new folder, and let's say I'm going to call it SPFx. And this one's going to be on-prem, just for illustration. So I'm going to go there, and then I'm going to actually pull up my command prompt, which I already have mapped to where I have where I created that folder. SPFx on-prem. So first thing you're going to do is change your directory. Oops, I want to go to the on-prem one. Cool. So now we're in there. I'm going to go over quickly to grab the command that I'm going to run, and I'm going to explain what the scary-looking command line is all about. It's not that scary. All right, Docker run. Docker run is basically a command to start your container. So that's what that, the first two letters means. -IT is for interactive mode. So essentially, there's no UI for Docker. You're actually just setting up a container, but you want to be able to interact with that container. And how do you do that? By specifying this flag, -IT flag. The --rm is basically remove the container when I'm done using it or when I close out of this command prompt. The name is the actual name that I want to give my container, and I'm just giving it the same name as the folder that I've created. And that is actually going to map to this path within the container, user app SPFx. So Mark, if you downloaded that, the Docker container from that website, it's going to map to the same drive for you as well. What's going to differ is just the name that you give to your container, and perhaps, and also the path where you're running it from.
Interesting.
Some of this is like the port numbers. It must be familiar to the SharePoint developers among you, or people who work with the SharePoint framework. 5432 is the API that it interacts with. 4321 is the port that the the workbench is hosted on. 35729, I believe that's responsible for auto refreshing any changes that you make in your SPFx web part. So you don't actually have to go in and save it. Once you run your gulp serve, it automatically recognizes any changes that you make to your code, which is amazing, I think. So that's what that port number is. And then last but not least is you're saying, hey, I want to grab the container that's out on that site that I was sharing earlier. So let me go back up there.
So that
kind of makes sense. Yeah. You'll notice something here. So let me go back here. So
it already knows where to go look. You just have to spell like a directory.
Exactly. So you'll see it's Waldeck m/SPFx. That's exactly what I have. And I have also appended a tag name here because I want to specifically map to the on-prem container. If I didn't have this, let's say, I just went like that, by default, it would just grab the latest container. Okay. That's the default behavior. So if you wanted, for example, maybe 1.4.0, you would just go into the command line, 1.4.0, and then hit enter. And then I'm going to go back to the on-prem example.
Get the remainder of the time today. I'll do my stuff later. Keep going. This is cool.
All right. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to take your...
no, you've earned it. You've won it.
Go fairly quick. I'm actually... I won't take too much longer. So we've got all our command line options available. Container is already in use by container. Okay, so that's because I already had that running, but it would actually, I knew the perils of demos, live demos. Sure. But it's essentially the same thing. It would run and install the container for you, and then after that, it's pretty much the same yeoman flow that you would use. So when I say yeoman flow, it's just running. Once you've run your command, you would just start with yo at Microsoft.SharePoint, and it actually, walks you through the prompts of, is it a hello world web part? Do you want to use a JavaScript framework, React, or no framework? So once you've got all of that going, it's just then running gulp serve, and it would essentially pull up your web part, that's using the on-prem Docker container.
So this web part is now running in that one container on that virtual machine, and you can go and access and interact with this web part and put it into your SharePoint environment somewhere. This is cool.
Yeah, it's all running locally, so it's got all the related information, and I can go into code. I also have Visual Studio Code installed. You can make changes here, and you can actually view your SPFx web part changes in your browser. The only thing is you got to
Kiran, how do you get into that code? You're in Visual Studio Code right now. This all is running in a container, almost like a separate machine. How do you get into the code we're looking at right now in that machine, the code that's executing?
Oh, I just pulled it up because once you mapped everything. Well, let me go back to my hello world web part. This is where I previously mapped my container to this folder. So it's got everything right here, the actual source code. And I just pulled this up in Visual Studio Code.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. That's all I had in terms. I know it's kind of quick. Docker is very cool. A lot of our customers are using it, and I'm really excited about it. And I want to start using it for my own projects going forward.
Kiran, fantastic so far. You were showing us this in like a demo mode. How does this go into production mode then? Is there a production virtual machine server that's run, a production Docker server, I guess, that it has a lot of different little containers? Each container is running an individual web part using a particular version of SPFx, and then your SharePoint production farm, how does it get access to those web parts that are now running in those containers?
It's precisely like you described. It's again going to your production farm, setting up the environment, and then just deploying your web parts there.
All right, very cool.
It's the same kind of tool set, running through your Yeoman or whatever tool set you've used, and then gulp serving it.
We got one quick question. Is there a way to debug things? I would think that it ties back into Visual Studio Code, but.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great question. Yes, and that's exactly how you do it. Because you're in a browser, you can actually pull up your Chrome Dev Console tools. It's the exact same debugging experience. So as you're making changes, you can see in your console if you've actually resolved it or if you're still continuing to have issues and such.
So you'd be bringing up Chrome and F12 in the developer console and using that as part of your debugging process?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
I
got a feeling there's going to be more demos of this on the horizon. All you were able to do today was unscare people about what Docker containers are. They're the equivalent of micro VMs, and show people how we can start developing to many different versions of the SharePoint framework, all encapsulated in their own little spaces, and still be able to drive those web parts into what? The same SharePoint production environment, even though they're actually interacting with a different version of the SharePoint framework. Am I following you so far?
Yep, absolutely,
cool.
Yeah.
All right, I hate to do this, but I'm gonna have to wrest control away from you just for the last 2 minutes. We're changing back to me. Kiran, thanks a lot for that demo.
Thank you.
Everybody, let me know if you can see the shared screen one last time.
Yep, you're fine.
Okay, oops, gotta get into present mode. Come on. Okay, we were going to talk about PowerApps, forms, and SharePoint lists. It's our user group. We're going to push that to next week. So I'm going to skip through all of this stuff. It's going to be interesting to show you what Microsoft's doing with PowerApps forms inside SharePoint lists. We didn't get to BYOP today, but what I wanted to start doing was setting the groundwork for June. We're going to be talking more about Microsoft flows in SharePoint and how super powerful they are. We're going to begin diving into Azure AI tools in SharePoint. Imagine things like image recognition as a web service that you can actually consume by applications that are actually stored inside SharePoint. That's where we want to start looking, but we'll also be diving back into more of the basics inside other versions of SharePoint, previous versions. Give us an idea of some of the things you would like to see on June 13th. Otherwise, thanks everybody for attending. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Kiran, for the time that you spent preparing and presenting the slide study. We had a fantastic time. Thanks to all of the new attendees and the other people that are attending that didn't show up. We'll see you on June 13th, okay? And that's all we got.
Have a great day.
Thanks. This is Mark signing off.